So today's the 19th. Just a little bit removed from that big day, the 31st. How you been doing since the 31st? Lieutenant Colonel Clementine Duke, retired.
I've been awesome.
Yeah.
I think I'm settling into this retirement.
It's working out for you. Huh?
It's working out just fine.
Yeah, because I know we were having a conversation just about, how time is flying and different things we have going on this year. And I know you got some things going on. But I don't think any of us flip the page the way you have. So this is it's an interesting time right now.
It's an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
But God is right. I'm going to be fine. It's a big adjustment, and He's prepared me. Mm-hmm. He continues to prepare me, and every day I get an aha moment of why He told me to take a year off. I get that aha moment of this is why He told me to do. Oh, this is why He told me to do that. So I'm looking forward to this year and all those aha moments.
Awesome. We're gonna get into all that. That's why we wanted to have you back.
Yes, sir.
So, welcome back.
Thank you.
And welcome you guys to another edition of the Blueprint Leadership Podcast. Now, we're just blessed to have a return guest, our very own Lieutenant Colonel Clementine Duke, retired, is back with us again today. To help us dive into this word that we've been getting from Pastor Brian. He started a new series last week called Only If. And we've been getting some real nuggets from that series. And to Clem's point, you're not the only one that's been getting ahas lately. So
that's right.
Glad you guys are here with us for another edition of the Blueprint Leadership Podcast. We're going to dive into the messages and just share what's going on with us, and so we can help you see how just the simple truths of the Word of God can continue to grow your leadership and improve your everyday lives. So, again, we're blessed to have Clem back with us again. Thank you so much. Pastor Lamar is here with us. And you guys, if you've been paying attention, I know you've been hearing about the Only If sermon series. Mm-hmm. Because there's been light bulbs going off on how we are to go about living life, opening our eyes to some things that seem normal and common to us, but have given us some whole new light on some things.
That's right.
And when I thought about you and I thought about your career and I thought about this transition, I knew there was so much more you could help us. You can help us with as well, as far as setting examples to let people know that, again, this word is real and this is for real life. So this message is teaching us about forgiveness. So I know that you've heard a lot of the message. In the last couple of weeks, Pastor Brian taught one, Pastor Deborah taught one.
Yes, sir.
Tell me just in general, if there's anything just major that's just jumped out at you from these first couple of weeks of the new sermon series.
Well, when Pastor Brian started the series, I wasn't aware we were starting a new series. So I'm sitting there and he was talking about, and he said we're going to be talking about unforgiveness. And I was like, uh-oh. So when he started, his sermon and he started teaching, and I felt like he was talking to me because I'm going through a situation right now. And every time I felt like I should have left church and went straight to that person. I was like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready. So I saw areas where I went through that in my career as well. But I'm currently going through that. So I want to see where God is going to take me through this sermon series, because I'm going through a tough one right now.
Yeah, awesome. And we want to get into all that. I knew it would resonate with you because we all kind of had that feeling, right? We've all felt like, oh, Lord, he's talking to me. I need to do something immediately based off that message. And that's what you always tell people. As a matter of fact, that's what we pray. Is that, there's going to be something said in this message that you're going to want to go do something right away based on the word that God's given us. And you've been in the midst of it, teaching on this sermon series as well. Is there anything that's kind of grabbed you because you helping share this word?
I have been grabbed as an understatement. I think I actually started a few weeks early on teaching on forgiveness because just my eyes have been open to how critical it is for us as the body of Christ. Forgiveness is not something we haven't heard before.
Right.
And it's something that people inside the church and outside of the church are familiar with.
Yes, sir.
It crosses generational lines, cultural lines, like humanity is familiar with forgiveness.
Yes.
So the challenge is, the first response is, we've heard this one before,
Right.
or we know about this, I'm familiar with this. But right away, I think our eyes were open to forgiveness in a new way. For me, it has been how critical forgiveness is to the work of the church.
Yes.
Like, for the most part, I've heard about how, it's important for me to operate in forgiveness for whatever way it benefits me. I don't want to be stuck in offense. I don't want my hearing. I don't want to hinder my communication with God. All of these reasons. I want the blessing to flow or whatever.
Yeah.
But then the bigger picture is that forgiveness is critical to the work of Christ continuing.
Right.
This it's like forgiveness is a characteristic of the church at large. And so now the motivation is like, I don't want to be that person who stops what God is doing
Yes.
in the earth. Like, I don't want to be the kink in the whole hose,
Right. And that's huge, right? Because oftentimes, as you said, a word like forgiveness conjures up very personal and specific relationships or circumstances. A person that, we had an interaction with, or a thing that happened to us, but reshaping that to the work of the church.
Right.
It should put it in a whole nother place for everyone as to how you think about forgiveness. Because again, we all, whether, we're talking about our individual lives or definitely our lives as leaders, we all pray that, that you would see God in us and everything he's called us to do. And we know, we have all the cliches and everything. It's not about me, it's about him. But when it comes to something like this, and to your point, that circumstance is just that, a circumstance. But if you don't understand how to and the purpose of forgiving, no, they're not going to see God in you. No, you're not doing the work of the church. No, I agree with you. That was one of the things that really hit me in the head is, we're talking about hindering the entire work of the church as God intended it.
Yes.
If you don't know how to forgive.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
That's a big deal to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
That is a big deal. And Clem, I, as I said earlier, I definitely thought about you from a leadership perspective, because we do try to speak to our leaders based on the word we're hearing and how they put that into effect. But I think a lot of times leaders don't actually think of the value, the importance of leading with a forgiving heart, and when we hear the things like, leaders need to have compassion and leaders, need to have empathy. And all those things are part of being a forgiving leader, part of leading your people. And last week we talked about undeserved blessings, right? And so we know that we've received undeserved blessings.
Yes.
And we also have to extend that. That is our responsibility to extend that as well. With all the leadership positions you've been in, with all the leaders you've had, has this, I hate to say concept, but has this idea of leading with a forgiving heart. Has that been something that you've come in contact with?
I had
Excuse me for interrupting, or the lack thereof. Often when I try to express to leaders a point that I want them to get, oftentimes I start with a situation that does not look like the desired one we want. Sometimes that's easier for people to identify, to say, okay, without that, this is what that looks like. Have you seen that?
I've seen that. I was going to get ready to tell you it doesn't look like the forgiving. I had a leader that was very toxic, had a very toxic leadership style, and that was a bully. And God showed me who she was from the beginning. So every time that I would go into her office and speak with her, God would tell me, your only response for her was yes, ma'am.
So before you go further, What does that look like? What is a toxic leader look like from the person who's being led by this type of leader?
When you go behind closed doors, they're different than what they are in the front of everybody. So when we would close the door, this is how a typical meeting would go with her. She was very demeaning. She was very critical. She would talk down to you. She would sometimes yell. And I remember specifically one meeting, those were all the things that she was doing to me. And God specifically said every time that I would go in there, your only response to her was yes, ma'am. Because I had to remember she's a higher ranking than me. So anything, most of the time that she would say would probably go. So my only response was yes, ma'am. So whatever she said, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And this particular time, my yes, ma'ams really upset her. And so she got really upset and she was like, is that the only thing that you have to say to me? And I was like, yes, ma'am. Because anything that I say at this point would sound like an excuse, and I don't do excuses. So, yes, ma'am. And that infuriated her.
Wow.
And that's all I had for her.
So at this point, you even being respectfully subordinate infuriated the leader.
Well, she wanted me to be disrespectful, and that's not in my nature. And I knew, even if it wasn't my nature, if I did that, what would happen. And I'm not, again, I came into the military to retire. And so I'm not about to mess up my career for someone else.
Right.
You know, and this, we're going in early, right?
Yes.
But you brought us there when you said that it wasn't in your nature to respond that way. The thing that I'm seeing more, and I haven't wrapped my arms all around it, but there's something to God creating us to reflect.
Yes.
Like we know that we're familiar with the idea of the scriptures that talk about how we're created to reflect His image.
Yes.
And I believe that so in our makeup, we are created to reflect. We're created to reflect His image.
Yeah.
Something either happened maybe in our fallen nature, or that we are created to reflect. If we're not exposed to His image, we will still reflect. And I think that all of us are subject to reflecting demeaning behavior, disrespectfulness, that's toxic behavior when it's what we've received.
Yes, sir.
Right? We've heard that before. Hurt people, and things like that.
Yes.
Right? So we reflect what we've seen. And so I believe for a believer, it's a natural, our reflecting Him should be almost natural, where it's not like when it comes to forgiveness, it's not that we're trying to motivate people to operate in the mechanics of forgiving.
Yes.
Right.
But when you understand, when you see Him and you see He's forgiving,
Yes.
then naturally you reflect that forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because I think about, just how have I processed the whole idea of forgiveness over my saved life. And I don't remember, when I reflect back over my life of faith, I don't remember there being a time when I switched the forgiveness switch on. I heard about it and said, okay, now you got to do it. But I remember, because of His introduction to me,
Yes.
in that, the way that I got saved, He spoke to me when I knew I was undeserving, and there was forgiveness present there.
Yes.
So then as I walked away from that moment, it was almost like it was more natural for me to at least slow down in my judgment of people, because I was just so aware of that's what He did for me.
Yeah. So let's back up before that moment, right? So, because I would dare to say that many of us are trying to get to that place where it is natural, because in this fallen world, in the world that we live in, that's not a natural response. The more natural response is you come at me, I'm coming at you. It's dog eat dog, best man win kind of mindset. And, I think one of the key scriptures that we use, during the course of this message is, not to return evil for evil, and the rest of that scripture, because that's a place where we want to get to so we can respond like that. So we can respond spirit-led and reflect Jesus the way we desire. Because I think people miss that. They think you're going to naturally respond like Jesus. It's like, no, you're not. You have to be developed to that point to where, as you said, that becomes your intent. That becomes your everything. And then you respond that way. Because if you continue to just function in the world and just do like the world do, you're going to respond like they respond. And you're going to reflect the world, not reflecting Jesus.
Right. Yeah. So it is absolutely based on what you're looking at. If I'm looking at people who are dog eat dog, and I'm observing that, then that's what I'm going to reflect. So my encouragement to people again is to not that we are wanting you to get caught up in the mechanics of Christianity, because that's a work. We all know how tough that is. The work that we're to do is to observe Him. Like the more I can see Him, or what we talk about attending to the revelation. Right. Yes. So the key for us, the work for us, is to get the revelation. Like the more of His character that's revealed to me, then the more natural it will be for me to reflect what I'm seeing. Absolutely. And then the work is for us to put ourselves in a position where we can see Him. Right. That's the work. Right. Like the fight for a Christian is to position themselves where they can see God. They can see Jesus, His nature, His character. If I can see it, then I can reflect it. Yeah. And so that's the work for us. Yeah, that's good. And again, one of those revelations of, it's not about the circumstance. It's not about, the other person. This is an individual work. You said that's a work for us to get ourselves in the right place. That's what we see. Then we won't have to worry about what we reflect if we get ourselves right. So, again, from that leadership position, you want to, the word says they will know us by, how we treat each other, by how we love each other. You want to be that loving leader. You want to be a leader who builds your people up, encourages your people. Then it starts with you. It starts with what you see. What you see is what you reflect, is what you said. And, forgiveness is such a part of that, because one of the other points what was made was, forgiveness is not about responding to the circumstances. It's about reflecting Jesus, as you just said, because circumstances will have you respond totally different. Totally. Yeah, than that.
And so it will have you responding out of character.
Exactly.
Not how Jesus meant for you to respond. It would, and if I would have responded in the manner that she wanted me to, it would have totally been out of character. And I know that. Yeah. And I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. And, and Pastor Deborah made a statement this past week in the message. She said, unforgiveness is a prison.
Yeah. It is. It is.
I mean, and you don't have to go too deep in your mind to imagine, but just imagine yourself shut up in a prison and what that feels like. But really recognizing that unforgiveness can take you there, can take you to an emotional prison where you're really locked down. And, I think those kind of points they were making is like really opens people's eyes as to how important the ability to forgive really is.
Yeah, I think it helps us identify us. At least, I take a word like that and do some reflection. Have I been in a prison? The way that Pastor Brian said it was, offense is a lid. And so then it allows you to reflect on yourself. Like, are there parts of, either my personality, are there areas where I'm hindered by something? Like I want to take this step forward, but I just can't shake the past or what happened. Right. So a message like that gives us the opportunity to do reflection and check ourselves out.
Yeah. And even when you use words like isolate, right? To keep it as simple as possible so you can keep relating. But, she also said, it isolates you from people that you should have relationships with, right? Because none of us are here to be by ourselves or to achieve by ourselves. It takes a bunch of people to do what God has called us to do. So if we're not even realizing that, we're cutting off what God has for us because we're isolated from the very people that are supposed to be part of what He's called us to do. Whether it's promotions, different things like that, leaders with businesses and business partners, but the inability to forgive can shut you off from all the very things that God put in place for what you were called to do.
Yeah.
Have you seen any kind of isolated situations where you could
Can I add this?
Yes.
I want to add this to the questions come to you,
Yes.
but I want to add this.
Yes.
So a few months ago in our nation, we experienced some, I hate using the word race, but racial disruption,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And it made me think about the number of people who have capped their influence, their reach, because they're offended with another group of people.
Yes, sir.
Now, I know military life, my father was in the Navy.
Yes, sir.
So military life, you're exposed to another group of people.
Yes, yes, sir.
What was that experience like, being in military, being in high-ranking leadership,
Yes, sir.
and having to deal with people of other cultures, people who they weren't raised like you, didn't have the experiences that you had, but we're having to work together. And in this culture where what's the word that you rank is an everyday thing that I have to be aware of.
Yeah.
How did you navigate?
As I mentioned last time, people need to understand that these people are raised how they're raised when they come into the military. Putting on a uniform does not change that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think in the culture and the times that we're in right now, it just brought that out. And so the same things that were seen on the outside, we saw on the inside. So it didn't change.
Yeah.
I just saw more, when I went up in rank, it's almost like the blinders were taken off. When you're lower in rank, you don't see those things because you're just more or less a worker bee. But when you sit in the meetings and you sit in the meetings where they make the decisions and you see how they make the decisions and the thought process that they use to make the decisions. And that was part of the reason why God showed me, this is your time to go. That's not how I operate. Because I began to see that what I was seeing on the outside is also in the inside. But I had to also realize those people brought that with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you navigate it, though? How do you navigate?
Because what's interesting is that you're there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that tripped up a lot of people in still believing that if I'm in the will of God, everything's going to be wonderful. Everything's going to be rosy. It's like, no, you're there. And so when we talk about forgiveness, these things aren't removed. You aren't removed from these circumstances. You're in these circumstances. That's why you have to understand the value, the purpose of forgiveness, because you're not removed from it. So in those situations, again, I know it's kind of hindsight to put it in perspective of forgiveness, but, again, how do you navigate what you see and, things that are not good things?
I navigated by staying true to me. And so some of the times my truth, me staying firm in what I believe won.
Yeah.
When I saw things being unfair, especially because of race, I challenged it.
Yeah.
One example, we were hiring a person for a position that we had in our section. This was right before I left, probably 8 months before I left. And the person that I worked with was not, didn't care for dark-skinned people. I say people of brown people. And so we had one coming in, and just by the name alone, you can just assume that she was Black. I won't say her name, but just by the name alone. And so she made the comment that, I know you're already biased toward her and you want her. And I was like, why would you say that? Like, I don't know who she is.
Right.
So my goal was to make her interview her by herself. So you can't say I was biased. I chose her because of a certain reason. And she was upset that I made her interview her alone. Because when I looked at her resume, first of all, she looked at her resume first and said she was the most qualified. But when she noticed the name, she wasn't too happy.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to make you tell me
That's right.
why she's not the most qualified. So again, I'm going to stay firm like I always did and challenge it. So she interviewed her. We interviewed the two Caucasian ladies together, and she interviewed the African-American lady by herself. So we came together and I said, okay, who's the most qualified? And she met all of the requirements. The other ones lacked in some areas. And she said, well, she was good, but she was kind of talkative. I said, well, the other person was talkative and you thought that was good. Well, I think her personality is bubbly, but I think she's going to be overbearing with the soldiers and things. I said, but the other person was talking and you thought that was a good thing because she would put them at ease. Well, she's going to be high ranking. She retired at high ranking. And I said, well, the other person was high ranking as well. She could not give me a good reason.
Valid reason.
And then finally she just said, well, she's the most qualified. We can go ahead and hire her. I said, okay, make the call.
What does the scripture say? Wise as serpents, but humble as doves. That's that situation.
Yes.
And you're right. And so stand true to yourself was what you were saying earlier about focusing on who you see. Because I found myself in those situations. It's from a leader's standpoint. The situations sometimes, they don't necessarily show up as, forgiveness type situations. Like you said, that's why you have to know who you are. But, I remember a specific situation where I was promoted and people around me had spent more time at the company, right? So obviously they saw themselves as more qualified. To be frank, I was actually the newest person in the company at the particular level that we were. But I got the promotion. And one person was even bold enough to ask, why do you think they gave you that position? And so I said, well, all I can tell you is, as I always do, I'm going to give it my all. And then, as time passes, we'll see. We'll talk about it again and we'll see. But there was some, a bit of, what's the right word? I'd say a bit of sabotage maybe because of people who did not agree with me getting the position. But it goes back to your point, who are you in those situations? Because having the actual rank at that point, having the position at that point, you're in that position of power, you're in that position of authority. So, put it bluntly, I could have made it hard for those people who were trying to make it hard for me.
Yes.
But that's not who I am, and that's not who God calls me to be. So, as is my typical approach, it was a pretty large department. I had about 12 to 14 managers underneath me. And so my initial effort was to then go in and make every team better, working through their manager to make every team better with everything I knew. And of course, the whole department as a whole improved performance and grew. Each individual manager, obviously, was elevated performance as well by me taking that approach. And it wasn't maybe 3 months down the road where the very same person who was bold enough to challenge me, came back and said, oh, okay, I see why you got the position. But back to your point, who are you looking at in those situations? Because again, with the power, with the authority, comes a lot of responsibility. It could have very well returned evil for evil. But by focusing on who God has called me to be and what I know that he wants me to do, walking that out was the actual winner in the situation.
Yes.
And, prayerfully, people saw in me what God wanted them to see in me, not just, some authoritative figure. And I mean, that's huge, especially in leadership positions. When it's not always you're in that position where you have to be subservient and then trying to figure out how to give. Sometimes you got the power. That's one of the most dangerous places, in the world for people to get power sometimes. How are you going to act then when you're in charge? But, Jesus is our example.
If you remember the last time I was here, when I said I always wanted, one of my greatest prayers was I always wanted people to see God in me.
Absolutely.
And I remember when I was the flight commander and I explained to my people in the first staff meeting that we had that I'm a servant leader. That's the type of leader that I am. And so I am here to serve them. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here to serve me.
Yeah.
At the rank that I am, my career is made. Whatever is going to get me to where I need to be is already in my record. At this point, they put me in this position is to serve my people. And that's what I did. And that was one of the things that the toxic leader did not like, because behind closed doors, I would stand up for my people because I understood that's why God had me there. I would protect and serve my people. And she didn't like that, but that's why I was there. And I was not going to get out of character for that.
Where'd you get that term from, servant leader?
I was thinking about it, and actually I Googled it to see what it was, and I was like, that's me. So that's the type of person that I am. I'm just here to serve you. That's what we're all here for. That's really what we're all here for.
Yeah, I do that
in
as well.
friendships, in marriage, in life in general, that's what we're here for.
And that's one of the concepts, that I teach as well, because you go through the leadership styles, various leadership models, and you can point out your natural bent as a leader and which one kind of fits you. But ultimately, those when you're called to take care of people, when you're called to as believers, when we're called to tend to the sheep, we're all called to be servant leaders.
Yes.
And that's putting the people first. That's every example of how Jesus led is should be listed under the definition of servant leader. And part of that, again, back to having that forgiving heart. Sometimes we get authority and we're so strict with everything and we crack the whip and, give no second chances. And that is the exact opposite. Of how we're called to lead. Exact opposite of a servant leader.
Yes, sir.
And that's why, forgiveness, forgiving heart in a leader is so critically important because of all the people that you're called to impact, because the influence you're supposed to have, and again, reflect Jesus in what he's called you to do.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, so in a deeper dive, Thursday morning deeper dive, Minister Ricky mentioned, he was just sharing his take on this message series.
Yeah.
And what he said led me to the thought that, forgiveness is something that you do beforehand.
Yes.
It's something that it's not the best way it functions is not as a reaction.
Correct.
But it is something that is given and something that is, I guess, a part of a person's character before a situation even comes up.
Yes.
And I think you actually taught it. I think the way you said it was you make an allowance for forgiveness.
That's right.
In other words, it's already there.
Right.
It's part of what you're going to do when that situation occurs, not reacting to that situation.
Yeah. Forgiveness has you make allowances or you make allowance available to people, right? That, so you just draw from this.
It's already there.
This source is already provided. It's there for offenses. Jesus said offenses will come. And so he did it, right? Yeah. I think that, he, through grace is like this source that allows me to be a human. God is very much aware of me being a human.
Yes.
I am going to make mistakes. And grace has already sourced room for my
It's already
mess
there.
ups.
It's already there.
So then grace people are gracious people.
Exactly. I think Pastor Brian referred to as it's an environment of imperfect people.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
And that's who we are.
Yes.
Right.
And as we all function together. So, back to making it as personal as possible. Again, when you say, grace people or gracious people, we were given undeserved blessings, as we said in the previous message.
Yes.
We were given grace. We were given second chances. So, but I still think one of the challenges in leadership is then to extend that
Yeah.
based on what you received.
Yes.
So, you have crossed some bridges and climbed some mountains. I'm sure there's situations that you can reflect back on, probably leaders or influential people who extended grace or forgiveness towards you to help you get to continue on your path to where God was taking you. Any particular influences or leaders come to mind?
I have in my time becoming a leader, a new leader. Being in my first leadership position. I had my first flight command position. In nursing, I wish they did a better job of giving us leadership schools like they do the line side. In medical, they don't do that.
Right.
They want you to work in your profession and then they put you in a leadership position.
Right.
And so when I was first in the leadership position, I stumbled a little bit. I did. And
We all did.
yeah, I did. And the biggest thing, especially with being in the military, is meeting suspenses. And to be honest with it, I sucked at it.
Yeah.
I really did.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to manage my time and so again, being a servant leader, I want to take care of my people. And so I struggle with it. And my boss told me, he said, "You're doing good in all the areas." He said, "But meeting your suspenses, you suck at it." He used the word.
Yeah.
And I said, "You know what, sir, you're right." And he said, "I'm going to need you to work on that because when you're late, you make me late."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, "Wow, I didn't think about that." And he said, "I'm never late."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, so I have to work on that." But and I did, and he extended me grace and time to grow and really learn what a leader. Because I'm growing into the position to take over his position when I took flight command, because he was retiring, and he really worked with me and extended me that grace and time. And so my last feedback with him, he said, "You are the best person that I've ever supervised." He said, "Everything that I told you to do, you did. No talk back, no, He said you did. He said, and you've improved tremendously." He said, "And in the one area that I asked you to work on," he said, "and when I told you about it," he said, "you didn't give me anything. You acknowledged that you owned it." He said, "But you have done so much better in that area."
Yeah.
But I told him, in him allowing me the grace to work in that area,
Correct.
to work on it and not beat me up with it, that allowed me to get better.
Yeah.
Because if I would have had the same type of leader that I had that would constantly just beat me up and beat me up and beat me up, I wouldn't have had time. But he allowed me that grace. He allowed me that time to work on it and get better and explain the importance and work with me. It's like night and day.
And that's a perfect example, because you're actually speaking from my notes without seeing them. But from that leadership perspective, yes, you don't, and people, again, our goal is to help you take this word that we're getting fed and then take it into everyday walking around life. Because you're not in the office necessarily speaking a word of forgiveness, right? But you're walking it out. That understanding that we're imperfect people, understanding that we're all going to make mistakes, and then allowing second chances. But one of the notes I put, forgiveness and leadership cultivates a greater loyalty, greater creativity, and increases productivity.
Yes.
Because we all make mistakes.
Yes.
But that's how we grow. And that's what forgiveness looks like in leadership. You don't have to have a tag that says forgiveness, but the fact that you acknowledge and understand first that we all make mistakes.
Yes.
He was there, not just pointing out the mistakes,
Yes.
encouraging and supportive
Yes, sir.
through the growth process to get you to where, I'm sure I know he probably didn't think you were going to wind up where you did, but that kind of stuff is what opens the door and moves us through the process or to where God is calling us. And that goes back to, again, what Pastor Deborah said. If we don't operate in forgiveness, we're limiting ourselves. We're blocking the very relationships that God has put in place for us to walk out His will. But that's what a forgiving leader, that's what a servant leader looks like.
I learned from him.
Yeah, yeah, I could absolutely see that. That's a great leader to learn from.
So I was thinking, so forgiveness creates that type of environment
Yes,
where
sir.
people can grow and thrive and have room or the grace to overcome their shortcomings. But then I imagine that there are some people who work in an environment. There's some, I'm imagining like somebody who's in sales. Well, we gotta get this number,
Right.
and we gotta get this number, and we only have this amount of time to get that number.
Yep.
And the environment is more demanding.
It is. Yes,
So
sir.
then I'm wondering, like, how does a person function with grace and with forgiveness in those type of environments?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I love you, baby, but we gotta get this number.
I've been there.
Right?
I've been there.
What does
And
that
you're
look
exactly
like?
right. All the points that you pointed out, though, are true. It's to stand true to yourself. And I think one of the points we made in your last episode was when you get to a certain level of leadership, right? The word you use, there's an expectation
Yes, sir.
for how you will function. And sometimes other people have a better grasp on that expectation than the actual leader does. In that environment, yes, those can be really harsh environments, the 1, 2, 3 strike you out, whatever. But I believe, and this is where I've functioned for my entire career, God's given me creativity, God's given me compassion, God's given me all those things necessary to be a servant leader. So even in the face of all those really demanding, high-powered performance situations, I have what's necessary to feed these people, to grow these people, to help these people achieve and produce. It requires a lot more of me to be creative when I see somebody not meeting the numbers, knowing that there's an impending situation coming if you don't meet them. So my first approach is not to be cookie cutter. What do these individuals need in order to build and better their performance? Now, that doesn't take away the requirements. Again, we're talking business.
Right.
So those things are there, but I think too often we give in to just a requirement and don't fully pull from everything that's in us to serve our people in getting there. We see it, again, learning what we learn from the word and taking it to the real world. We hear phrases all the time, right? Like, Jesus would leave the 99 to go get the one. Okay, so when your team is struggling and, the team is doing okay, but this one person is struggling, what do you do to reach this person and help them achieve? So I think a lot of that onus falls on the leader to be creative, to come up with different things to help people achieve. Now, the other thing is really communicating with people to let them make sure they understand the expectation. And, because they too have to be bought in that here's the thing that's required, and when he recognized, when you used the example, he recognized an area of weakness in you. He was very clear that was an area of weakness, right? He didn't hide it. He didn't wait until they were getting ready to kick you out. Right. He pointed that out, and then he gave you the things you needed to do to improve.
Yes.
And yes, you had a willingness to take in what he was giving you and to grow. And again, we're called to assume the good in people. We're called to assume that nobody came to this company to kill it. Nobody came here to get fired in a week or so. So, my I was taught assume positive intent. My assuming positive intent is that you want to do well here. That's why you're here. So that is my approach. So it doesn't relieve leaders from the calling to lead with compassion. You know, just because you have numbers, you know, you have, you know, quotas, whatever that is.
Right.
And that's one of the things I really wanted to impress on leaders. There's an expectation of you that's why you're the leader. You know, that, you're going to do what's necessary to move the dial. You know, there's some that don't make it, because they don't express that willingness to grow. They don't express that willingness to do it. But, you know, that's not something that we will go into it with or just assume. You know, a person will show you that, and, you know, that becomes what it becomes. But, you know, I think leaders carry a lot more onus toward making a situation work than a lot of people are willing to accept.
Yeah.
I think that's important. But it all comes back to, you know, the same characteristics that we talk about in having a forgiving heart.
Yes.
Imperfect people that we're dealing with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Clem, I was thinking about flashing back to the retired Clem. And now you have to take all of this experience, all this wisdom, and transfer this to your new life, right?
Yes,
to
sir.
your new life and moving forward from here. So, since we're still in the Only If series, so there's more sermons to come. But at this point, what would you say is something that has just really hit you as being on time, valuable, and powerful to help you in this transition that you're in right now?
God is really showing me I need to take some time for myself. I talked about last time my purpose was, you know, being a nurse, taking care of people. But in that, I lost taking care of me. And having those aha moments, I just had an aha moment of that. And so this year is going to be about reconnecting with me.
Okay.
Because being a servant leader, sometimes I did it to the detriment of me.
Right.
Especially with that last assignment. And so this time I need to reconnect. And all of this is bringing me closer to him.
Yeah.
All of it is bringing me closer to him, because even going through that situation brought me closer to him.
Right.
But taking this time off, reconnecting with him or becoming closer to him, I need that time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are asking me, well, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? When he tells me, I'll let you know. And I know that he will. But in the process, it's not surprising to me, but what's comforting to me, when he told me that I would be taking the next year off, he told me that he would take care of me and I wouldn't have to worry about anything. And he has done that.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful and gracious that I hear his word and I follow his word. I'm being obedient to his word. And I have not missed a beat with anything.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm going to continue to rest and hear.
That's good. That's good. And I'll use the point you made to land. Why do I always feel the need to say land a plane when you're here? It's unnecessary pun. But we'll wrap it there, because you mentioned looking after yourself. And the one point that was on my spirit that we did not mention today was forgiveness is about self-forgiveness as well. Because when we talk about imperfect people, we're talking about ourselves. And we make mistakes, you know, and often those mistakes, especially leaders, I think, those mistakes can linger and you can harbor those mistakes. But, you know, we have to understand that we have to forgive ourselves as well. And one of the ways I know that, you know, oftentimes when we make a mistake, it kind of stays with us because we're impacting other people. But, you know, mistakes are for us to reflect on, learn from, and grow from, and move on. And so forgiveness for a leader is invaluable. So I would say if, prayerfully we've said something that touched you today, but there's more to this sermon series that we're in right now. So please stay tuned in, stay plugged in for everything that our pastors have to share from God about understanding the purpose and the true value of forgiveness and leading with a forgiving heart. And Clem, thank you so much again for stopping in with us.
My pleasure.
So glad to have you today. Pastor Lamar, always dropping the knowledge. Thank you, man.
Pleasure.
And thank you guys for being here with us. We will see you next time on the Blueprint Leadership Podcast.